I got caught staring. Her morning yoga didn't plan to notice her. I had only been in this building for 6 days. 6 days of unpacked boxes, instant coffee, and learning which hallway light flickered at exactly 3 a.m. That morning, I stepped onto my balcony with a mug I hadn't even sipped yet, and there she was, one balcony over, moving through her yoga poses like the morning had been designed specifically around her. Slow, deliberate, effortless in a way that made everything else feel loud. I told myself I'd look away. I didn't. Then it happened. She rose from a pose, turned her head slightly to the left, and her eyes found mine with a precision that felt almost intentional. For a moment neither of us moved. The city was already humming below us. Somewhere a car horn, a distant elevator chime, but up there on those 2 balconies, everything went completely still. She didn't gasp, didn't frown. She simply held my gaze for 3 full seconds, and then at the corner of her mouth, the smallest, most composed smirk appeared. Then she looked away, back to her practice. As if nothing had happened, I stood there, mug still full, completely forgetting how to be a normal person. I went back inside and sat on the edge of my unmade bed. My coffee had gone cold by the time I actually looked at it. I kept replaying those 3 seconds. The way she didn't flinch. The way she didn't look embarrassed or offended or even surprised. She just looked at me, like she had already accounted for my existence before I had. I told myself it meant nothing. She was probably just being polite. Maybe that smirk was pity. Maybe she felt sorry for the obviously sleep-deprived guy next door who had nothing better to do at sunrise than stare at his neighbor. I unpacked 3 boxes that afternoon with the mechanical focus of someone trying very hard not to think about something specific. It didn't work. By evening, I had convinced myself of 2 things. First, she had already forgotten about it. And second, I needed to be the kind of man who could also forget about it. I made dinner, something simple. Pasta that stuck together because I drained too early. I ate standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through nothing on my phone, pretending I was a person with a very full and interesting life. At 9:47 p.m., someone knocked on my door. I remember the time because I had just glanced at the microwave clock, thinking about whether it was too late to make tea. I opened the door, and the air in my apartment rearranged itself. She was standing in the hallway wearing a simple dark blouse and tailored trousers, her hair down now, slightly different from the morning. No yoga mat, no sunrise backdrop. Just her. Under the dull hallway light, which somehow still managed to look flattering, because apparently the universe had opinions about this woman. She was, I want to be careful with how I say this, the kind of beautiful that doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles into the room quietly and then refuses to leave. She looked at me with calm, steady eyes. "Hi," she said. Her voice was low and unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once scrambled for words in her life. "Hi," I said back. Like the enormously articulate person that I am, she held up a small, elegant tool, a wrench of all things. Slim and chrome, the kind that looked like it had never actually touched a pipe in its life. "I hate to bother you," she said, and her tone suggested she didn't entirely hate it. "But I think my kitchen faucet is doing something it shouldn't be doing. The building manager isn't picking up, and I noticed." She paused, the corner of her mouth doing that same thing it had done this morning. "You seem like someone who might be useful." I stared at the wrench, then at her, then at the wrench again. I can, yes." I stepped back from the door. "Come in, please." She stepped inside and I became suddenly, acutely aware of every single unpacked box, the cold pasta on the counter, the throw blanket bunched up on the couch in a shape that could only be described as abandoned. She didn't seem to notice. Or she was gracious enough to pretend she didn't. "You just moved in?" she asked, glancing around with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. 6 days ago," I said, already moving toward the counter to put the pasta bowl somewhere less visible. "Still in the discovery phase, she repeated, as if testing the phrase. "I like that." She turned to look at me directly. "I'm Elaine Daniel," I said. She nodded once slowly, like she was filing it away somewhere important. "Well, Daniel," she held out the wrench toward me. "Are you actually handy, or were you just trying to look confident just now?" I felt the laugh before I could stop it. "Honestly," I said, taking the wrench from her hand, my fingers brushing hers for exactly 1 second, "I have no idea. But I'm willing to find out." She smiled then, a full one. Not the composed smirk from the balcony, something warmer, more unguarded. And that was the moment, though I didn't know it yet, that changed everything. Her kitchen faucet was, in fact, doing something it shouldn't be doing. A slow, persistent drip that had clearly been ignored for longer than one evening. The kind of sound that starts as a minor irritation and slowly becomes the loudest thing in a quiet apartment. I crouched under the sink, flashlight from my phone propped against a cleaning bottle, trying to look like I knew exactly what I was doing. I did not exactly know what I was doing. "How's it going down there?" she asked from somewhere above me. "Tremendously well," I said, tightening something that may or may not have needed tightening. "I have everything completely under control." "You've been staring at that pipe for 4 minutes." "I'm studying it," I said. "There's a difference." I heard her laugh softly. It was a quiet sound, almost private, like she hadn't fully intended to let it out. I adjusted something, tightened the valve, and the dripping slowed, then stopped. I stayed under there an extra moment just to be sure, and also, if I'm being honest, to collect myself before standing up and facing her again. I emerged, set her wrench on the counter, and said, "Done." She was leaning against the opposite counter with her arms loosely crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, somewhere between amused and genuinely surprised. "Useful," she said. "You were right. I had a 50-50 shot," I admitted. She smiled again and pushed off the counter. "Tea?" she asked, already moving toward the kettle like the question was a formality. "Sure," I said, because apparently I lived here now. Her apartment was extraordinary, not in the loud, excessive way I might have expected from someone who carried herself the way she did. It was refined, deliberate. Every object seemed chosen rather than accumulated. There were fresh flowers on the kitchen island, white ones. I didn't know the name. And books on the coffee table that looked genuinely read rather than displayed. It felt like her. Completely, quietly like her. We sat at her kitchen island with 2 cups of tea she made without asking how I took mine, and somehow got exactly right. "So," she said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "Daniel, 6 days in, what do you think of the building?" "The hallway light on the 3rd floor flickers," I said. "At 3 a.m., she added immediately. I looked at her. "You know about it? I reported it 4 times. She raised an eyebrow. "Welcome to the building." I laughed, a real one, unguarded, and she looked pleased with herself in the most understated way possible. "What brought you here?" she asked then, her tone shifting just slightly. More genuine now, less small talk. "New job," I said. "Needed a fresh start. New city. New chapter." All the things people say when they're running slightly towards something and slightly away from something else. She was quiet for a moment, turning her mug slowly in her hands. "I know that feeling," she said. Something in her voice landed differently, softer. Like a door opening just an inch, I didn't push. I just held the space she'd created and let it breathe. She looked up at me. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She tilted her head slightly. Someone who would have looked away this morning. The balcony. She was bringing it back, but not with accusation. With something more like acknowledgement. "I should have," I said honestly. "Probably," she agreed. But her eyes were warm when she said it. We stayed there longer than either of us planned. The tea went from hot to warm to barely warm. The conversation moved slowly and comfortably through books, neighborhoods, terrible building managers, and the particular loneliness of arriving somewhere new. At some point I realized I had stopped being nervous. And at some point after that, I realized she had stopped performing composure. She was just present, unhurried, real. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. I stepped into the hallway and turned back. "Same time tomorrow?" I said, nodding toward her balcony. She looked at me for a moment, then that small, composed smirk returned. "Get some sleep, Daniel," she said softly, and closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a second longer than necessary, smiling at nothing. The next 2 weeks moved differently than any 2 weeks I could remember. There's a particular kind of time that exists when someone new enters your life and quietly rearranges the furniture of your daily routine, without either of you acknowledging it out loud. That's what those weeks were. It started small. A coffee cup left outside my door one morning with a sticky note that said simply, "You looked like you needed this." I hadn't even been awake yet. I stood in my doorway in yesterday's t-shirt, holding that cup, trying to remember the last time anyone had paid that kind of quiet attention to me. Then it became evening walks. Neither of us planned them exactly. It seemed to happen organically. I'd be heading down to clear my head, and she'd be coming back from somewhere, and somehow we'd end up walking the same direction for longer than the route required. She walked like she did everything else, unhurried, purposeful, like the sidewalk had been expecting her. During those walks, she told me things. Slowly, in the way that careful people share things, testing the water with one sentence before committing to the next. She told me she had spent the better part of her 30s living inside someone else's vision of what her life should look like. She didn't name him, not yet. But I could hear the weight of him in the spaces between her words, the way she'd pause mid-sentence, the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when she referred to that chapter. "You gave up a lot?" I asked one evening, careful with the question. She was quiet for a moment, watching the streetlights come on one by one ahead of us. "I gave up myself," she said simply. "Gradually, the way you don't notice a room getting darker until you can't find the door." I didn't say anything. Sometimes the most respectful response to honesty that brave is silence. She glanced at me sideways. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Listening like it actually matters to you." "It does," I said. She looked away again, but I caught the slight softening around her eyes before she did. One night, we ended up on her balcony, the same balcony. The place where this had all begun, except now it was night, and the city below was a scatter of amber light, and we were sitting on her outdoor chairs with a bottle of wine she'd opened without ceremony. "Tell me something true," she said suddenly, out of nowhere. I turned to look at her. She was watching the city, her glass resting against her knee. "Something true," I repeated. "Something you wouldn't normally say out loud." I thought about it for a long moment, genuinely thought about it. "I think," I said slowly, "that I moved to this city because I needed to find out who I was when nobody was watching, when there were no old expectations, no version of me that someone else had already decided on." She turned to look at me then. "Really look." "And have you?" she asked. "Found out?" "I'm starting to," I said. The space between us on that balcony felt alive, like it had its own quiet pulse. She reached over and set her hand briefly on top of mine, just for a second, warm and deliberate. Then she pulled it back and looked at the city again, as if the gesture had been perfectly ordinary. My heart disagreed entirely. "His name was Marcus," she said quietly. It was the first time she'd offered a name. I kept my expression steady, giving her the room to continue. "He was." She paused, choosing words with the care of someone who had learned to be precise about painful things. "He was the kind of man who confused possession with devotion, who thought that giving someone everything meant they owed him everything in return." She set her glass down. "I left with 2 suitcases," she said. "Everything else I left behind." She said it without drama, without tears. But her hands, resting now in her lap, were very still in the way that hands are still when they're working hard not to tremble. I wanted to reach over the way she had reached over to me. Instead, I said, "You didn't leave yourself behind this time." She turned to look at me, and for a moment, just a moment, something in her expression broke open. Briefly, like light through a crack. Then she composed herself, picked up her glass, and looked back at the city. But before she did, I saw it. And it terrified me, because I was already in far deeper than I had admitted to myself. If you've ever felt something growing between you and someone before either of you had the courage to name it, you already know exactly where this is going. Stay with me. He showed up on a Tuesday. I didn't know it was him at first. I just noticed the car, because it was impossible not to. A black luxury sedan, long and silent, the kind that doesn't announce itself with noise but with presence. It idled in front of the building for a long moment before the door opened. The man who stepped out was somewhere in his mid-50s. Tall. Silver at the temples in the deliberate way that powerful men wear aging, like an accessory rather than a concession. He was dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, and he moved across the sidewalk with the unhurried authority of someone who had never once been told to wait. I was coming back from the corner store, a bag of groceries in each hand, when I saw him walk through the building entrance. Something about him made me slow my pace. I don't know how to explain it except to say that some people carry a particular kind of energy that your body registers before your mind catches up. A low-frequency warning. Like the air pressure shifting before a storm. I followed him inside at a distance. He didn't go to the front desk. He already knew which floor. He stepped into the elevator with the confidence of someone returning to a place he considered, on some level, still his. I took the stairs. I heard the knock from my own hallway. 3 sharp, unhurried knocks. The knock of a man who has never needed to knock twice. I stood very still outside my own door, groceries still in hand, listening. A long pause, then her door opened. I couldn't hear the words from where I stood, only the register. His voice low and smooth, hers measured and careful. The kind of careful that isn't weakness. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you're dealing with. After a few minutes, her door closed. I went inside my apartment and put the groceries away slowly, placing each item in the cabinet with unnecessary precision because I needed something to do with my hands. She knocked on my door an hour later. When I opened it, she looked composed, surface level, entirely composed. But her eyes were doing something her face wasn't. There was a tightness there, a controlled exhaustion, like someone who had just finished a conversation that required every available internal resource. He found out where I moved, she said, without preamble. Stepping inside, I closed the door quietly behind her. Marcus, I said, not a question. Marcus, she confirmed. She sat on my couch, not the careful, poised way she usually occupied space, but heavily, like something in her had temporarily run out of effort. He says he just wants to talk, she said. He always says that. Her voice was even, but her fingers were pressed flat against her knees. Talking with Marcus is a negotiation. Everything with Marcus is a negotiation. What does he want? I asked, sitting across from her. She looked at me for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. A consideration, a calculation, a decision. He wants me to come back, she said. He's framing it as concern, checking in on me, making sure I'm... She paused, and the word that came next carried a quiet, exhausted anger. Comfortable, are you? I asked. Comfortable. She held my gaze. I was, she said, until an hour ago. The room was very quiet. He saw you, she said then, her voice dropping slightly. In the lobby, he asked the front desk about you. Something cold moved through me, not fear exactly, something adjacent to it. Elaine, he's not a violent man, she said quickly. He's worse than that. He's a strategic one. She met my eyes directly. Daniel, I need you to understand what kind of person he is. He doesn't break things. He dismantles them, quietly, methodically. I held her gaze and didn't look away. But somewhere beneath that steadiness, a voice in the back of my mind was asking a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. What exactly was I willing to risk? And was I enough to be worth the risk to her? This is the part of the story where everything gets harder before it gets real. If you're feeling this, drop a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stay close. Because what happens next changes everything. She pulled away 3 days later, not dramatically. Not with a confrontation or a tearful speech. That wasn't Elaine's way. She pulled away the way someone closes a window before a storm, quietly, practically, with a kind of calm that takes considerable effort to maintain. The morning coffee cup stopped appearing outside my door. The evening walks stopped without announcement. I'd find myself downstairs at the usual time, walking the usual route alone, hands in my pockets telling myself I wasn't waiting for the sound of the lobby door behind me. I was waiting. When I passed her in the hallway on Thursday, she smiled. Warm but brief. The smile of someone managing distance with great care. She asked how my week was going. I said fine. She nodded. We moved in opposite directions. It lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds where I wanted to say approximately 40 different things and chose none of them. By the weekend, the silence between our 2 apartments had developed a weight I could physically feel. I'd find myself pausing near my balcony door in the mornings and then deliberately walking away from it. I wasn't going to stand there. I wasn't going to be the person who stared, except that on Sunday morning I was. I was standing there with my coffee, not even pretending otherwise, when her balcony door slid open. She stepped out. She saw me immediately. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The city hummed below. A pigeon landed on the railing between our balconies and then thought better of it. Daniel, she said finally. Elaine, I said back. A pause. "I'm sorry about this week," she said. Her voice was careful, measured, but underneath it something genuinely apologetic. "You don't have to apologize," I said. "I'm doing it anyway," she said quietly. I held my mug with both hands. "Is this about Marcus?" She leaned against her railing and looked at the city for a moment before answering. "He called twice yesterday," she said. "He's been speaking to people, asking questions." She glanced at me. "About you specifically. What kind of questions? The kind that are meant to make a point rather than gather information." Her jaw tightened. "He knows your name, your employer. How long you've lived here." She paused. "He's sending a message, to you or to me. Both," she said, "but mostly to me." I set my mug on the railing. "And the message is?" She looked at me directly. "That getting close to someone like me comes with consequences for them." Her voice didn't waver, but something behind her eyes did. "He's done it before, to people who—" She stopped herself. Started again. "He has resources, Daniel, and he uses them without hesitation when he feels." "Threatened?" I offered. She was quiet for a moment. "Challenged," she corrected softly. The word landed heavily between us. I looked at her, really looked at her, and understood then what the distance of this past week had actually been. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't indifference. It was protection. She was trying to build a wall between us not because she wanted to, but because she was afraid of what he might do to me if she didn't. And somehow, that made everything worse, and everything clearer. "Elaine," I said. "I'm a 28-year-old man with unpacked boxes and pasta that sticks together. I'm not naive about what he is compared to what I am." She watched me carefully. "But I need you to let me decide what I'm willing to walk into," I said. "That's not your decision to make for me." Her hands tightened on the railing. "You don't know him," she said. "No," I admitted. "But I know what it looks like when someone is being careful with another person, not because they don't care." I held her gaze. "But because they care too much." The silence that followed was the longest kind. She looked at me with an expression I will never fully forget. Something cracked open in it. Grief and gratitude and fear all at once, layered over each other like sediment. Then her phone rang inside. She glanced back toward her apartment, then at me. "I have to," she started. "Go," I said quietly. She went inside and I stood on that balcony with my cold coffee, my heart somewhere between terrified and completely certain, facing the only real question that remained. Was I going to step back or step forward? If this story is hitting somewhere close to home, hit that like button right now. Because what Daniel decides next, and what Elaine does when he does, is the part that will stay with you. I made a decision that Sunday night, not a dramatic one. Not the kind you announce to anyone or rehearse in a mirror. Just a quiet, internal settling. The kind that happens when you stop arguing with yourself and finally listen to the part that already knows the answer. I was going to step forward. I knocked on her door at 8 p.m. She opened it after a moment, still holding her phone loosely at her side, and whatever she had been expecting, it wasn't this. Wasn't me, standing there in the hallway with no pretext, no wrench, no borrowed reason, just me. "I'm not here because I'm naive," I said, before she could speak. "And I'm not here because I think I can match whatever Marcus has or is. I'm here because the past few weeks have been the most." I paused, searching for the right word. "Alive I've felt in longer than I can honestly remember, and I'm not willing to let fear make that decision for me." She was very still in the doorway. "Daniel." "I'm not finished," I said gently. She closed her mouth. Her eyes were very bright. "You pulled away to protect me," I said. "I understand that. I think it's one of the most quietly generous things anyone has ever done for me. But Elaine," I held her gaze steadily, "I am a grown man who is allowed to choose his own risks, and I'm choosing this one." The hallway was very quiet. Her hand, still holding the phone, dropped slowly to her side. "He called again today," she said, her voice barely above a murmur. "He's coming back to the building tomorrow. He wants a formal conversation." She exhaled slowly. "He's bringing his lawyer." "Of course he is," I said. "And despite everything, despite the weight and the fear and the sheer absurdity of the situation." She laughed, a real one, brief and surprised and completely unguarded. And right there in that dim hallway, that laugh was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. "You're not afraid of him," she said, studying me with something close to wonder. "I didn't say that," I replied honestly. "I said I'm choosing this anyway. Something in her expression shifted. The last carefully maintained wall, the one she'd been reinforcing for weeks, came down, not with drama, just quietly. Like a held breath finally released, she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. Marcus came the next morning with his lawyer and his dark coat and his particular brand of controlled authority. He sat across from Elaine in her living room, and I sat beside her. He looked at me with the measured assessment of a man recalculating a situation. I looked back at him with the calm of someone who had already made his decision before walking into the room. The conversation was exactly what she said it would be, a negotiation dressed as concern. He offered things, significant things, the kind of things designed to remind her of everything she'd walked away from. Elaine listened to all of it. Then she said very quietly and very clearly, "No." One word, absolute, unambiguous. He looked at her for a long moment, then at me. Then he stood, adjusted his coat, and left with his lawyer without another word. The door closed. The room was silent. Then Elaine turned to look at me, and her eyes were full, not with sadness, but with something that looked remarkably like relief. Like someone who had been holding an enormous weight for a very long time and had finally, completely set it down. I reached over and took her hand. She held on. Weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I stepped onto my balcony with my coffee. She was already there, not doing yoga. Just standing, looking at the city, a cup in her own hands. She turned when she heard my door slide open. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I said back. We stood there in comfortable, unhurried silence as the sun came up over the city. Two people, two balconies, no pretexts, no performances. Just the quiet, extraordinary ordinary of two people who had chosen each other freely. I sipped my coffee. She smiled at the horizon, and the morning, like all the best mornings, asked nothing of us at all. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because love, chosen freely and held gently, is always worth telling.